I just wanted to ask you, in the midst of the virus, the chaos from the virus, and then the social issues that have led to just rioting and just political divides like we've never seen before. What do you think has caused this chaos, and where do you think it's going?
Oh man, just posed like the two biggest questions of 2020 to me right at the beginning of the podcast. Well, I don't think there could be one thing to point at to say why all these things have come together exactly how they have. There's super religious people who think this is some, at least partially or maybe fully, God's judgment on humanity. And, you hear the people who, in my view, have a very skewed understanding of God saying, this is like a reckoning for our past in terms of the rioting and the looting and the racial tensions. And then with COVID, that's like another form of God's judgment on the whole entire world. It's you kind of have that perspective. And then there's, a whole variety of other ones. But for me, a huge thing we touched on in our first episode and I see happening is this continual, like a merging of worldviews that cannot happen gracefully in any way or calmly. And so there's people trying to draw from multiple worldviews and trying to live their life in a way that connects between multiples. And that just can't work. And at the end of the day, I think something I'm realizing this year is that you really have to pick one. And as we've seen with COVID sweeping across the world, depending on your worldview, depending on where your hope ultimately lies, it was either a really big deal or not so big of a deal to some people. And again, as we're seeing with racial tensions in the U.S., but now it's turning into I would say throughout most of the Western world. I don't think a lot of Asia has been feeling it in the same way, but even countries like the UK and seeing people wanting to tear down statues of Winston Churchill, things like that. Mm-hmm. It's wild times that we're living in. And so I think it's a colliding of worldviews is what I would say.
Yeah. Okay. So before we even get into what we see on the horizon, let me just tease that out a bit. So you said you think it's a large part to do with two worldviews coming together and they're never gonna mesh nicely, or maybe they can't mesh at all. And so do you think it's two worldviews specifically, or which worldviews, or do you think it's kind of just a culmination of things that have been happening over a long period of time, or what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think it's more than two. So, I mean, to me, the way that I see it is you have the Western world founded on Judeo-Christian values and the worldview that comes along with that. And then you have this worldview that's been developing over the last few decades of secular humanism. And those things right now are colliding into each other in a really stunning way, in a really unfortunate way, because a lot of are end up feeling lost somewhere in between the two. But it's not only those two. There's also, we see it's getting less and less underneath as an undercurrent to the general, public conversation. And it's becoming more of a mainstream idea, this like full on neo-Marxism wrapped up in this. We could dig more into this term, but what I'm starting to think of as identity socialism. And so there's also that as an undercurrent. And then, I would say those are the main two. And then and another one that has been more on the margins, but seems to be fully introducing itself as kind of a third worldview to butt heads with the other two.
Okay. Yeah. So in that, like, I can kind of picture Judeo-Christian values. I can picture what that looks like. I think, a pretty succinct society, which is quite traditional, has currents that have run from generation to generation, maybe even going to the same church, but definitely believing similar things, maybe, going to a similar school, whatever. how do you think, could you just define secular humanism and kind of how you think that that plays out or what that looks like?
Hmm. Yeah. So humanism, take that, we'll just separate it, secular and humanism.
Hmm.
Humanism is the belief that people are able to find self-fulfillment, able to find meaning and fulfillment in life in and of themselves, and that are also able to establish and cultivate a moral system. And
Mm.
then the secular side of that means that we can do all of that without the belief or honor of God. And so
Hmm.
when you put them together, you have this worldview where it it just turns into there's nothing transcendent, there's nothing outside of what you can see and touch and feel, and the things that we can produce, and the moments we can create, the products we can make, and the society that we can have just between
Hmm.
us, not led by any greater vision, any transcendent or objective morality. It turns into
Right.
everything being subjective. And so the way that I see this playing out and affecting things um, is honestly, I think the number one thing is hopelessness. I see a lot of people
Hmm.
without hope. And
Wow, that's so good.
it's a huge, huge thing that's happened this year. Because secular humanism, when everything is great, which, so we have America, we have the Western world, which has been the best in a lot of categories and has forged this new path for humanity and done a lot of things that has never been done before. Societally and politically, in terms of freedom and liberty and equality, and
Yeah.
it's really amazing. But then, so you have everything's nice and good, but then when you take away the foundations of what got you there, and you just develop more of this mindset of, I don't know, look what we did, like look where we are, as
Yeah.
humanity's never been here before, and we can keep going, we can keep doing this, but it's really on us. Like, I don't really want to be
Yeah.
accountable to anything higher than me. I don't want to, the term like fear of God just doesn't sit well with me. My
Right.
experience of religious people hasn't
People
been
hate that stuff.
hasn't been good. And so I just don't want that. And so I end up with
Hmm.
maybe even somebody that grew up in the church, but you end up with this secular humanist perspective on life and society, that really doesn't give you anything outside of just us doing our best to make things as good as possible. And when we're
Yeah.
failing at that, or when something crazy and unexpected like COVID-19 comes along, we don't really have a lot of answer in terms of where to draw our hope from. And so I just
Mm.
see a lot of people, you can see the statistics about this, incredible rises in depression and
Yeah.
anxiety, which
Suicide.
in suicide, which all correlate to unemployment, disconnection from other people. But really, I think underlying all of that is a lack of ultimate hope, which comes
Hmm.
from worldviews other than secular humanism.